Breaking news, folks, breaking news. Small Business Superhero Podcast has just landed.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the AMS Dynamic Small Business Superheroes Podcast. We're here with episode 2 with El Jefe himself, the CEO of Accounting Management Solutions, the Superman to our Justice League, the Iron Man to our Avengers, Travis Idle.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. Now, we've also got the mad scientist running the engineering stack. And so, yes, there he is.
I'm nodding.
I see you nodding.
Yes.
Apparently, the engineer's refusing to speak in the intro today.
No. This is something that I'm not that familiar with, so I'm actually sitting back and going to learn today.
That's a fantastic point to make. So the engineer,
it's
a subject matter that he's not that familiar with, that honestly, I'm not as familiar with as I should be. But we know for sure that the question we're going to talk about today is something that you get hit with probably every day.
Pretty much.
I know I've seen it happen to you probably every day. And while it is your pleasure to talk about it, I think it'd be great we can reach a much larger audience talking about it on this type of a platform.
Agreed.
So here's what we've got. The scenario that we're faced with, you have an entrepreneur, somebody that's got that, I want to have my own side business, my own side hustle, and they begin. It's what started as a hobby is now starting to make some money. Mm-hmm. So we want to protect that money, and we also want to protect ourselves. So do I need to incorporate as an LLC? Do I need an S Corp? What do I need to do? And that's the question that you get posed with. So in your estimation, at what point do we need to start taking those kind of steps?
So the first thing I would say is it depends on the type of business you're in.
Okay.
If you are just a sole proprietor and you're out there cutting grass where there's not a lot of legal liability, then I think you're fine to stay a sole proprietor and just keep doing that until, and we'll talk about it a little later, about the compliance costs of getting into an LLC and then potentially into a corporation.
So when you say sole proprietor, what exactly does that mean, and what's the legal liability involved with being a sole proprietor?
So just as a caveat, we don't give legal advice on this show.
Gotcha.
And so contact your attorney or your local legal people who are licensed to give you legal advice.
He reminds me of me.
So these are merely our opinions and our suggestions, but please talk to your legal counsel about that. Sole proprietors are basically you conducting business in your name or a DBA doing business as that you sort of register with in North Carolina. I think you register with your local city. You're doing business as name, and you're operating in essentially your Social Security number, although you can get a tax ID, a separate tax ID, and we usually recommend that for a small business. That way you don't give out 1099s or anything that is in your name and social.
Gotcha.
But there is no legal liability protection that I'm aware of operating as a business as a sole proprietor.
So I cut grass, and I go and I start barbarian grass cutting, but the only thing I did was just start calling it barbarian grass cutting. It's still just me as an individual, my Social Security number.
That's right.
So then when I get out there and ruin Christmas and run over somebody's favorite lawn gnome, they come after Dave.
They're coming after Dave, even though it's Dave's barbarian grass cutting.
Gotcha.
One thing to also think about is if you're cutting Ash's grass and you want Ash to pay you in Dave's barbarian grass cutting as opposed to Dave, when he makes that check out, you need to have a checking account set up in the business name because that's what the bank's going to want to see if Ash is cutting the checks to the barbarian grass cutting.
Now, is that a thing that can be done by somebody? So I decide to go and do that today.
Yes.
I go to the bank and I say, yes, I want a checking account, but I want it to say barbarian grass cutting.
As far as I know, the answer is yes. You won't have any protection of your name unless you go register your DBA with the city or county where you're at. So
Understood.
That means that Ash could go over and set up barbarian grass cutting as well, but there's two different people.
Don't get any ideas over there.
Oh, yep. No, manual labor is not my thing. I'm done with that.
That's why he's the mad scientist over there engineering the podcast.
Yep, but you can do that today. It takes you about 10 or 15 minutes, and we charge clients usually about 15 minutes of our time to set up a tax ID through the IRS.
So now that was going to be my next question. As a sole proprietor, operating as doing business as, there's still a way to obtain some of those tax benefits of operating a business.
Yes. So report your income that you get paid for your services or whatever it is that you sell, and then you have your business expenses. Your in this case with grass cutting, your fuel, your contract labor, or your employees. You're going to deduct their pay, your transportation to and from jobs, any advertising you do, business cards, T-shirts, safety equipment that you have, all that kind of stuff. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask one question that I already know the answer to for the benefit of the audience.
Sure.
In your estimation, does it make it easier if that person who's operating the business keeps those funds separate? So you said have a separate checking account, for example.
Absolutely. Even if you're operating as Dave and Dave's Grass Cutting, you don't even set up a different business name. Ideally, you want to set up a separate checking account for that to deposit your income in and then record your expenses out of for the month, for the year, whatever. It just makes things cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
And if you decide a year from now you've got $1 million worth of business and you want to sell to the mad scientist, now you just show him, when he's doing his due diligence, you're going to show him one set of checking accounts, not your personal checking account where your mortgage comes out of and all the other stuff that you pay for personally.
Understood. And that will make it easier when I enlist the help of somebody like you at the end of the year.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. It makes your bookkeeping or bookkeeping for someone else to do very, very clean and simple.
Which in the end translate to it costs less to have it done.
That's exactly right.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So that's sole proprietorship. And it sounds like the two major things to remember is, number one, that having a separate checking account for that business that you're operating is one of the important cornerstones to have. And also, if you are looking to benefit from some of those tax benefits, you need to have somebody obtain a tax ID number for you.
Not so much the tax ID to obtain to get the business benefits, business tax benefits, or the deductions. It just sort of helps migrate your business away from you, Dave, as an individual to Dave's Barbarian Grass Cutting, and that tax ID. Let's say you hire a couple of people to help you on an independent contractor basis. When you issue them a 1099 at the end of the year, you don't want your name and social on there. You want Dave's Barbarian Grass Cutting and that tax ID or EIN that's assigned from the IRS on there to give to whoever it is that you hire and issue a 1099 to.
So at the sole proprietorship level, that tax ID number functions almost more as a pseudonym for your Social Security number.
Yes.
Gotcha.
It basically is the Social Security number for your business.
It's a Social Security number smokescreen. I like that. Keep your social safe. So that's sole proprietorship. And
before we skip past that, one of the things I like to say is, so if you're a sole proprietor but you're selling, let's say, necklaces, right, or goods where there is some product liability, therein lies you may want to not operate as an individual sole proprietor, but yet set up some type of legal entity.
So if you're doing acupuncture, or you're selling nutritional supplements, something where there's a potential for some type of a liability down the line.
To me, on the smaller end or lower income end, there's more of a potential for lawsuits on when you have product liability than maybe so much so than you have for service.
For services. Okay. That actually makes a lot of sense. And also you mentioned to make sure to protect your doing business as name somehow, some way.
Correct.
Like registering it, or I know we'll actually do another podcast on it as far as like U.S. Patent and Trademark Office versus going to the Secretary of State, et cetera, et cetera. So sole proprietorship we've covered there. Now, at what point, at what level, do you think somebody needs to start thinking about becoming a limited liability company? Do you think, is that an income level? Is it an amount of time that they're spending on the business? Is it a type of business that we're moving into? At what point do you think it's imperative?
Oh, that's a really good question. Again, I'll always say this, it depends.
That's the answer to every question I've noticed in finance and law.
It is.
That's always, it depends. Sit down.
So
we're going to be a minute.
Let's go back to we're going to sell products and services. We're going to sell products, not services.
Okay.
So we have a business that sells products, whether that's business cards or T-shirts or whatever.
Widgets.
If there are liability protection that you need, probably you want to form an LLC, a limited liability company, or a corporation sooner rather than later in terms of the amount of income that you're generating.
Gotcha.
That is something you still need to talk to your local legal representatives about. Okay. For a service-based business, you can continue to operate as a sole proprietor, or you can form a limited liability company or some type of corporation. We generally, so let's start with single-member LLCs, which are very common. And this is all assuming that it's one owner. If you form a LLC and you have more than one owner, now you have a partnership potentially, or it can be taxed also as a corporation.
Okay.
I know we're getting into a lot of technical things, but
That's okay.
So let's keep it simple and say it's a single-member LLC. So it is a one-owner business, and they own 100% of the LLC. We generally, you're not going to get any tax benefit difference between the limited liability company, taxed as a single-member LLC, or the sole proprietor. There's no additional tax benefits there.
Okay.
So there's mainly some liability protection, and then if you decide you want to operate as Dave's Barbarian Grass Cutting LLC, and you want that on all your business accounts, business credit cards, checking account,
Which kind of,
T-shirts, all that kind of stuff.
in the social psyche, it does kind of give a little bit of credibility.
It does.
Whether it's warranted or not, because, the Barbarian Grass Cutting LLC might cut terrible grass, whereas Dave's Grass Cutting, sole proprietor, might be the best lawn care individual you've ever met. But LLC feels like, oh, well, they've got a company. It's a company.
Right. So I would say probably, once your side hustle becomes a little bit more profitable, let's say you're, probably $5,000 to $10,000 a year in gross revenue, you might want to consider some type of, this has sort of gotten beyond just a side gig.
Gotcha.
This is maybe starting to really grow some legs and take form and become a potentially a full-time job for you.
What do you think, in your estimation, I know you've got a lot of experience in this, so in your experience, is there a ballpark type of maintenance cost that an LLC costs somebody on an annual basis?
It varies from state to state. In the state of North Carolina, where we're at, it costs you $200 a year to maintain that limited liability company name and registration with the Secretary of State. Some states, I think, are lesser fees, and then some are maybe more. I think California is the minimum is $800 a year.
Wow. Okay.
So there is some maintenance cost with just for you, even if you didn't do any amount of business, to keep that LLC registered with the Secretary of State.
So hobbies and side hustles, smaller side hustles, maybe don't need this, but that's why you're saying when it starts to grow legs, then it starts becoming worth it in a lot of situations.
Yes. And the final thing I was going to mention is because I think we have a lot of clients, certainly, and then people that may be listening to our podcast who are in investment real estate.
Okay.
And you'll want to set up your LLC in the beginning if you're getting into this realm, because when you close on your first property, that's when you'll want the LLC in place.
Gotcha.
You do not, and we don't recommend our clients put real estate into corporations, whether they're S or C. We don't advise that. But putting it into a single-member LLC is perfectly fine. If you don't do it when you close on the property the first time, then you'll have to have it retitled, and so you'll have to go through another closing if you want to transfer it from you individually to the LLC.
To the LLC.
And
Wow.
then the same goes with borrowing the money. So if you are borrowing money on your rental property that you're buying, the loan will need to be in the name of the LLC if you're going to put it into an LLC. Otherwise, it needs to be in your name. And again, you'll have to reclose the loan and reclose the property if you don't do it when you initially purchase the property.
So you're not, in that vein, we're talking about people who are purchasing real estate as an investment. We're not talking about realtors.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, realtors
can also set up-
realtors can do it as well, but what you're talking about, the scenario you're describing is somebody who is buying property as an investment.
Yes, sir. Correct. Mm-hmm.
So that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's something I never thought of, the fact that before you close on the first one, you better have your LLC in place so that you can have those protections, you can have those benefits.
Right.
Now, on the tax end of it, though, there's no difference in the tax benefit from a sole proprietor versus a single-member LLC.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. No tax benefits. No additional tax benefits.
Mad scientist, are you learning?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
I was just
This
thinking about.
exciting stuff hasn't put you to sleep yet.
he said no superlatives, nothing to gossip about. He's
No,
like, yeah.
I was just thinking about all the stuff. I'm like, all the equipment I've got for my little hobby. I'm kind of like, yikes.
Well,
But
you know-
I have no product. It's just art, kind of. So I don't know how that would fit in.
Well, from my attorney clients advise us to have the limited liability protection there in case of a lawsuit, because we unfortunately here in the U.S. we live in a litigious society, and if some monitor you have falls on one of your guests, you may potentially be liable for that.
Matter of fact,
And-
just
and I
slide
don't
over
know-
this a little bit.
Now, why would he bring up monitors falling? I cannot imagine.
I need these. I have 4 computers in here,
Yeah,
and it's tough to switch all the time.
he's going to go from mad scientist to the mad computer engineer.
And so your attorney can tell you whether the LLC will protect your personal assets from your business assets in a lawsuit like that.
That makes sense.
I don't know the answer to that question.
But now, so again, like you said, we don't give legal advice, but I'm actually curious by virtue of the fact that, like, selling T-shirts is much lower risk than something, for example, like selling nutritional supplements or even food. If you're selling cupcakes, homemade cupcakes, and you're selling them, that there's liability there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, peanut allergies come readily to
yeah.
mind. You know, so somebody even on the small side who's just making cupcakes for the neighborhood, would you advise them to take some type of a step like a single member LLC in order to protect them from some of that liability?
I would encourage them to talk to their attorney to see whether that's necessary.
Gotcha.
I don't know what's going to protect them in say they're doling out some salmonella to everybody. I don't know what's going to protect them, if anything.
But from a
yeah.
tax perspective, a person who's only cooking cupcakes for the neighborhood, they're not going to get enough benefit out of an LLC versus a sole proprietorship, so it's not necessarily worth the $200+ to keep it running.
I don't think so, unless you think, look, this is my first step, and within a couple months, I'm going to go ahead and blow the doors off, and I'm going to be slinging cupcakes to everybody in the city.
Yeah. I mean, we had somebody that actually lived in our town who started making pickles.
Okay.
Just making pickles for the neighborhood. Next thing you know, is she multinational? I know national now, but
Not no more.
not no more. Oh,
Yeah,
well.
that's a whole subject that. My wife used to make cakes.
Yeah.
She had a bakery, and she made it for friends and family. And next thing I know, she's selling them on Instagram and stuff. And so she started LLC, and started a company name, got a business account, and worked like 12 hours for a $5 cake. So he's like,
Right.
yeah. But yeah, but as a whole thing is like, wonder if you give somebody a bad batch or an allergy or something. It's like if something happens and they sue us, they won't take the house. They'll just take your, bakery.
The idea is that, yes, it limits your personal assets
Yeah.
from being involved in the business. But
No, not my mixer.
Yeah, exactly. My $500 mixer.
So at what point in the whole equation does a sales and use tax come into play?
That also varies from state to state, because we do have some states that don't have sales tax in the United States, and then most of the states do have some type of sales tax.
You heard it here, folks. Reach out to Accounting Management Solutions, Greensboro, North Carolina, for your interstate sales and use tax advice.
Yeah, and it varies. I mean, that is a very broad subject that I mean, we look into, but we always have to do a lot of research for, because we don't operate in every county and every city with sales tax in all the U.S. Although we
I
do
have a
quite
small
few.
amount of experience, exposure to it. I won't say experience, exposure to it from assisting on some things, and it varies from county to county, city to city, as far as what little bit do they tack a penny and a half on to the sales and use tax versus this county versus that county. It's astounding and complicated to a neophyte, uninitiated like me.
There's some great softwares that handle it, but even in the state of North Carolina, it varies by zip code. So even in the same county, you'll have variations between 6.75% here and 7.25%.
It's astounding.
So-
Isn't that wild? Like we talk about sales tax, and people, well, what's sales tax? Oh, yeah, it's 7 cents to the dollar. Is it? Where you stand it?
Throw it in the harbor.
Sales tax.
Took you a second. He got there though.
Yeah, it took me. I'm a little slow this morning. Sales tax probably needs its own podcast, but in the broad sense, If you're selling to other resellers or retail, so if you're wholesaling, so if you're making cakes but you're selling them to a grocery store and they are reselling them, then you will get a sales tax exemption certificate from your client or your retailer, and that says that basically you don't charge me sales tax, I'm going to charge the client's sales tax.
Oh, gotcha. So
And
they
so
take care of that.
your wife who was making the cakes, she doesn't charge sales tax. But the grocery store that you sold it to will charge sales tax, and
So that-
they're responsible for it.
I didn't know that. That keeps the government, keeps from paying taxes twice for one
Yes,
product.
and it's your get out of jail free card in case you were to get audited by the Departments of Revenue about sales tax and say, hey, Ash, why are you not paying sales tax? You give them the exemption certificate saying, I'm not charging sales tax because this grocery store is charging sales tax.
I didn't know that. Oh, yeah.
So, but if you're selling products to the end user, there generally should be sales tax.
Is that unique to physical products, or does that apply to services as well?
That varies from state to state too.
Wow. Okay. The boss says this needs its own podcast, and I'm tending to agree with him all of a sudden.
In the state of North Carolina, they do charge sales tax since I think 2016 on repairs and maintenance labor.
Okay.
So now, it used to when you go get your car fixed, they charge you for the sales tax on the parts, but the labor was whatever the rate was. Now there's sales tax on the labor and sales tax on the parts because that's considered RMI.
And you can't throw
repairs,
the
maintenance, and
labor
installation.
in the harbor, Ash. No matter.
You can. First, you got to get a harbor,
You start there.
and then you get the labor.
So next step up from LLC. So sole proprietorship and LLC, we've determined tax benefit wise is essentially the same. However, the cost of maintaining the LLC is a couple $100 a year here in North Carolina.
Sure, yeah.
But there are some liability protections that come along with the LLC. So
Potentially, yes.
at what point do you listen to somebody describing the business they're operating and your brain goes, I think this person should be moving to an S Corp?
So I look at a couple things. If they do not have employees, so now we're back to Dave's Barbarian Grass Cutting, and Dave is the only person who works there.
Got it.
Then we usually look at a threshold of around $40,000 in profit. So that is gross receipts or gross sales minus all your expenses. So by the time you've bought all your fuel and your equipment and all mileage and all the other kind of stuff, at the end of the day, if you're making about $40,000 profit, we look at converting you to be taxed or converting your LLC to be taxed as an S Corp and not a sole single member LLC anymore.
Okay.
And that is to sort of help save on some of the payroll tax, because at $40,000 in profit, all your profit is subject to employment tax, and that's self-employment tax.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
And so then as an S Corp, we get all that profit is not subject to employment tax, but the IRS says we can't just have no payroll tax. So that's when you become a W-2 employee of your own company.
Your own company. Wow. Okay.
If you have employees, so now let's say Dave's Barbarian Grass Cutting is only making $20,000 a year. Well, let me back up. The reason we wait until $40,000 is because I roughly cannot save you enough money in payroll tax to justify the fees that we charge to run the payroll and for the separate tax return that has to be filed for the S Corp.
Does the government hit you as well? Because like an LLC is a couple $100. Does the government come back with, it's $1,000 for S Corp or something like that?
It varies from state to state. There is a franchise tax in many states on S Corps, which are pass-throughs, but that cost is usually fairly minimal.
Gotcha.
The cost of the payroll processing or filing of the payroll tax returns and the withholding and remittance and then the W-2 that you got to issue at the end of the year, there's a compliance cost that is around that, involved with that processing. And then because the S Corp now files its own tax return, there's a compliance cost for that. So if you're going to do your own tax returns and your own payroll, then there's no additional cost except for your time. If you're going to employ a service firm like ours to do that, there's a cost associated with that.
Just based on your description of what it entails, I think most people would choose to have somebody do that for them.
We recommend that some payroll service handles it for them, as opposed to filing manual payroll tax returns, and the same for the S Corp tax return on its own.
And at that $40,000 profit level is the point at which you are able to save them more in payroll tax than they are spending in compliance to get the benefit.
In general, yes.
Because prior to that, if they're making less than $40,000 in profit, then they are actually paying more to be in compliance than they're saving by becoming an S corp.
Yes.
Gotcha.
The one caveat there is if now you're not the only employee at Dave's Barbarian Grass Cutting, okay? If you have had to hire Ash, you already have the employment, you already have the payroll compliance cost, no matter what your profit is.
That's
Okay.
so. That's why you say that your first employee is the most expensive.
Yes.
Gotcha.
The filing for quarterly payroll tax returns with the federal government and the states, that cost is the same for the first employee or 100 employees.
Wow. Okay. So taking that first step, it feels like getting punched in the face.
Yes.
But after that, it's you don't get hit again.
Basically, no. I mean, there's a slight incremental cost per employee, but it is not anywhere near what the first employee costs.
Gotcha. That actually makes a lot of sense.
So the threshold for you to be converted from an LLC to an S corp in our world, to me, if you have an employee on the books already, is much lower than the $40,000 in profit.
What do you
Because-
feel? Is there a threshold? Like you said, 40 for no employees. If they have employees,
I would probably say $10,000 to $20,000
10 to 20?
in profit per year.
So if they're operating with employees, then at that point, in the 10 to 20 range, you feel like you can sufficiently save them money that would justify you coming on board and them converting to an S corp.
Right, because then the only incremental cost is the cost of the additional tax return.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then the savings kind of grows from there as the profits of your S corp now grow.
So you've talked a little bit about things that people should have in mind almost before they begin in some situations. Your investment real estate individual who should be thinking LLC before he goes to the closing table that first time.
Yes.
But then we talk about some other people, like if I'm screen printing T-shirts in the garage, you know what, I'm good, I'm safe to wait down the road a little bit before when money starts coming in, profit starts coming in, then I could start thinking about LLC, S Corp, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you can think of that everyone should keep in mind before beginning? Like any pitfall that you can step in that it hurts to extract yourself from if you don't have this in mind ahead of time?
Before beginning the business?
Yeah, like an example would be that you already covered is what if somebody is 3 years in, but they've been running the whole thing out of their personal checking account, and now they come to you to clean up the books. Well, that's a quagmire that they've driven themselves into because they didn't know. Do you have any other words of wisdom like that? Like before we begin, have a separate checking account and
I would say be cautious about forming a corporation. So one of the things we didn't talk about is so there's LLCs and there's sole proprietors, right? And LLCs can be taxed in 3 ways: single member LLC, corporations, and then we'll talk about whether that's C or S, right? And then as a partnership.
Okay.
And partnerships have a lot of flexibility, but the same taxation basically as sole proprietors and single member LLCs. But I would caution clients about forming corporations in the beginning, yes.
Gotcha.
Because you even if you form a corporation, either an INC Inc., and whether that's taxed as a C corp or an S corp, you automatically have incurred those compliance costs.
Do you see people incorporating as an INC incorporated for a similar emotional benefit like we see with LLC? You know, I'm going to be Barbarian Inc. because it feels like it's got more clout.
I see it much less frequently than I used to.
But it used to
Most
be the
people
thing.
seem to default to the limited liability company. Yeah.
Gotcha. I mean, I can see it because I'm such and such incorporated. I
Yeah.
can see that feeling, you know. But it sounds like individuals like yourself, firms like yours, have been educating people to the point that people now are skewing back towards defaulting to the LLC. So to sum up something for a lot of our audience, which is made up of people who are operating side hustles or even just hobbies that they're making a little bit of money from, it sounds like primary thing, if you're doing a thing to make a little bit of money and you think, even have an inkling that you're going to start going for it, like really chasing it down, then a separate checking account would be something for them to consider.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So the foundation, separate the funds to make cleaner books.
Exactly.
I like it. Thank you for joining us for the Small Business Superheroes podcast. Travis, thank you very much for being here with us. You are a wealth of knowledge, and we're going to be coming back around and hitting you up for some more of our questions about how to start a small business down the road. If nothing else, we already identified at least one more podcast for the sales and use tax.
At least one.
That we're going to have to, our 3-part series on sales and use tax.
Oh, man. That's
We'll
gonna be
start
awesome.
off with all the cities that start with A. In Albuquerque, the sales and use tax is.
Oh, man. That's some good sleeping material right
That-
there.
that's what I was thinking.
Small Business Superheroes, check us out on amsdynamics.com, and we'll have the contact information for Travis and Accounting Management Solutions up on the screen and down below in the description.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, sir.
Extra, the Small Business Superheroes podcast on all of your favorite podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Anchor, iHeartRadio, and many more. Small Business Superheroes is powered by AMSDynamics.com.